Today for me, I've invited Dr. Agam to be here to speak to us. You know, all of you had to make some plans to get here. You probably had to make sure somebody took care of your dogs, some of you. You probably had to make sure that your refrigerator is still working properly. Because I have this at the switch box, it wants to go off every now and then. That's not a good thing. So I'm going to make sure that. Had to tell my wife that, what happens when it clicks off? You push this, it gets red. Preparations, planning, all kinds of stuff's been going on in your lives just to get here. Even to fill your tank with the right amount of gas. You had to plan, strategic. You thought about it. And we want to think about missions. We want to strategically know what's needed, where people have a Bible, where they don't have a Bible, where there's been work, what the history of that work is. We strategically think about missions. So today I've asked Dr. Agam from Bushnell University to come back again. He was here last year and blessed us with some really good thoughts and direction. And so I've asked him this year in Perspectives course, over the 16 weeks, one of the sections will be the strategic perspective on missions. And it's surprising how many people are in the churches and have probably very little idea of where missions should be going and what's needed. They kind of know people are moving to the cities because the cities in their state are growing. They don't realize that around the world that's even in greater ways oftentimes happening. And what's the strategy for reaching the cities? Thank you, Dr. DeWelt, for the mustard seed targeting and strategically going to Japan. So I've asked Dr. Agam, by the way, just side note, I know that we will learn something from him, and I also like his perspective coming from Nigeria and the great continent of Africa. But I also just invite him because I want to hang out with him. So it's awesome to have him here this week. We want to welcome you. And thank you very much for coming today and talking to us about the changes in missions, strategic perspective.
Thank you very much, Danny. How's everybody doing today? So, Danny told me to talk about changes on the horizon in missions. And that was scary to think about, because when you say changes on the horizon, many times people start thinking about forecasting. Does anybody remember 1999? Anybody? All the prognostications. We're not supposed to be here now because, of course, everything was going to go up in flames. And I hear people often doing all this forecasting and prediction. Most of the time, it's not very helpful. Occasionally, you find one or two that turn out to be insightful. And that's because, in my opinion anyway, a lot of times when we're trying to look at changes, we're looking into the future and we're focusing on the future. The problem with focusing on the future is that we'll never get there. Nobody ever gets to the future, right? You're never going to get to tomorrow because by the time tomorrow comes around, it's today. So, as a matter of fact, the best way to prepare for the future is by paying close attention to the present. So when people look at the future, sometimes it distracts them from the present. And then, of course, many times, a lot of us are so busy focused on the past that we don't even see what's going on in the present. So, as I was thinking about changes on the horizon, I thought the best way to approach it is to look at some of the things that are happening right now. So the things that are happening right now and the way that some of them are trends, are beginning to shape what may happen tomorrow. And I'm going to talk about a number of things in big blocks, and perhaps if there's time, we can have a conversation in the room, because I'd like to hear what you think. I want to talk about the next generation. One of the things I love about working at Bushnell is because I get a chance to invest in the next generation. Our students now, a lot of people call them Gen Zs. Gen Zs are from, I think the youngest of that cohort would be about 15-ish, all the way up to mid-20s, mid to late 20s. And there was a survey done by Barna and Alpha in 2021 where they surveyed Gen Zs to see what they think about evangelism and sharing their faith. Now, the reason I want to start from there is because 20 years from now, 30 years from now, that would be our missionary workforce. There's good news. The good news is that Gen Zs see various opportunities for sharing their faith in their daily life. They put as much emphasis on living out their faith daily and sharing their faith story with others, as well as inviting people to come join them, maybe in church services or other events. When they were asked how many of them, what they think about letting your actions speak rather than using words to explain your faith to someone, 53% viewed that very positively, 30% positively. Inviting someone to attend a church event with you, 44% very positive, 36% positive. Asking the person to give a reason for their lifestyle choices or beliefs, 22% positively, and 22% very positive, and 24% positive. So Gen Zs prefer to emphasize relational evangelism and witnessing, and less of what we know as what we might call traditional evangelism and witnessing. They were asked about whether they will prefer to have these spiritual conversations in person or online. Surprisingly, this cohort that some people also call screenagers, because most of them came out of the womb holding on to a screen. The majority, overwhelmingly, prefer to have spiritual conversations in person. Gen Zs, even more than millennials, the cohort that's older than them, more than millennials, more than Gen Xers, I'm a Gen Xer. When it comes to being open to talking about spiritual things with others, Gen Z, that cohort is more open to that, and I think that's good news. They tend to reject traditional evangelistic language and the pressure tactics that some of us might be used to. Will you give your life to Jesus? Will you do it now so that you don't go to hell? You know, a car might knock you over once you step out of this building. They're less likely to do that. They prefer actions over words. They're comfortable with listening non-judgmentally. And they do believe that sharing their faith is very important to their spiritual commitment. Here's a big question. Given some of these things I've mentioned, are they going to become very authentic evangelists, or will it all fizzle out into ineffectiveness because also they do not have as much grounding in the gospel? Will they become the most authentic evangelists, or will they become ineffective without stronger gospel training? For anybody here who has these young people as members of your family, children, grandchildren, part of your church, it's important for us to encourage this relational approach they have towards soul winning, and to actually train them in the gospel, their knowledge of Scripture, their knowledge of the gospel. So, in summary, Gen Z prioritizes authentic relationships over traditional methods, but they also need gospel fluency in order to be effective in evangelism. That's the people, the workforce. If we're thinking about missions, we also have to think of the people who will be reached. Where are the people? Because that's who Christ died for. God is concerned about people. Where are the people? I'll list out a number of things. The 10 most populous countries in the world that account for more than half the population of the world. India, 1.4 billion. China, 1.4 billion. USA, a little over 346 million. Indonesia, 284 million. Pakistan, 253 million. Nigeria, 235 million. Brazil, 212. Bangladesh, 174. Russia, 144, and Ethiopia, 134. Those 10 countries account for more than half the population of the world. We're told that 31% of the world's population currently identify as Christian. 31%. That includes Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, 23% Muslim, where do the people who have not heard the gospel or who do not have an opportunity to hear the gospel. Where are they mostly? They're mostly in a region of the world called the 1040 window, which is between the 10 and 40 are latitudes. It contains most of North Africa and Asia. That's where you have the largest concentration of people who have not heard the gospel and who do not have a lot of opportunity. And when we say do not have a lot of opportunity, it means there are not enough Christians in that place to evangelize and reach the people there. The mission field today, there's about 450,000 serving full-time missionaries presently. The definition, I have to be very clear here, the definition is people who are serving cross-culturally and who have been there for longer than 2 years. About 450,000. In 2001, it was 1.1 million, a little over 1.1 million. It has declined 60%. We have more than 7,000 unreached people groups worldwide. When I look at those numbers, I'm saddened by it. Of the people who have never heard about Jesus, 96.6% of them live in the 1040 window. 20% do not even have any Bible in their language. Now, you remember those 450,000 serving missionaries? The numbers are going down, but even those people, we have a retention challenge. It used to be 1 or 2 generations ago that when people were going to the mission field, they actually packed their things in a coffin. Apart from space, but the understanding was they were going there for the rest of their lives. Now we don't have as many people who serve long-term overseas. About half of those who go with the intention of staying long-term serve for 5 years or less. And the majority of those people, they leave because of preventable reasons. Sometimes it's language barriers or culture shock. Sometimes it's homesickness and isolation. Sometimes it's the physical, emotional, and spiritual demands. And a lot of those things, in my assessment, comes down to an adequate support system. The top 3 reasons: financial support, lack of communication from home, and burnout or homesickness. Those are the top 3 reasons why people leave the mission field. Why am I sharing this depressing news? Because I want us to do something about it. There are 4 things you can do. You can pray. You can pray for people who are serving. Pray for them on your own. Join prayer teams that support missionaries. You can give, provide financial support for mission work. You can go short term. You can also serve. If you have skills, you can volunteer your skills to help out on the mission field. Now, again, also, when we're thinking about mission, I want to mention one other big factor, and that's migration. Because when we're thinking about mission, we're thinking about reaching people, making disciples of people and nations, helping them know about Jesus and follow Jesus. What that means is that where people are, that's where God is calling us to go. And people are moving. I don't know that there's any time where there's as much migration as there is presently. Some of it is the result of instability, hardship, poverty, war. There are many refugees in the U.S. If you went to some parts of Minnesota, you'll see entire communities of people from Syria. How did they end up in the U.S.? Because of war. But here's the thing. Before that happened, if somebody wanted to go as a missionary in Syria, they'll have to do language training, they'll raise support, financial support, we'll have to pray for them, and then send them. And even then, when they went there, you couldn't go get a visa to travel to Syria as a missionary. You were going to go as a teacher, or you want to start a business or something. But then, as a result of the war that was raging there for years, you have large swaths of these people coming to the U.S. like a captive audience. What I mean is you go to the library and you see a young woman who has her toddler. She does not speak much English. She probably does not know where many of the grocery stores are. She's wearing her hijab. You can help her learn English. You can take her out to coffee or show her where the grocery store is. And she will listen to you because she wants. That's a strategic gospel opportunity. That's a strategic missional opportunity. But here's why I raised that. When that was going on, there were Christians who were interested in missions, but who were more engrossed in the political scene of the U.S. and saying, oh no, we don't want all those foreigners from Syria coming to the U.S. How do I know this? Because I had a conversation with one person who had been a missionary. But I think what was happening is they were thinking about mission using the paradigm from the 1950s and 1960s. Because then the mission field was over there. We prepare, we go over there. But I'm saying that right now, mission is from everywhere to everywhere. Meaning, there are people who are going from places that used to be the mission field. And before, those places were a mission field that Nigeria was mission field 100 years ago. The U.S. was mission force. But the U.S. is both mission field and mission force. Nigeria is both mission field and mission force. Because now you have people going from everywhere to everywhere. The migration of people is something that we'll need to take into consideration seriously when we think about mission. And that migration is not going to stop. It's not going to slow down, in my opinion. As long as you have war, as long as you have natural disasters, as long as you have sin and wickedness in human hearts, beginning from this one beating in my chest, you're going to have things that cause migration. As we speak, it's raging in Ukraine, in Israel and Palestine. I'm saying it's easy for us to look at those things that are happening and view them as issues. But they're not just issues. It's people. People for whom Jesus died. And where those people are, that's where God is calling us to engage them. Some of those people may come where we are. That's where we go. Migration is important when we think about mission strategically. Cities are important when we think about mission strategically. Danny kind of mentioned it. Again, 100 years ago, when you think mission, a missionary is going overseas and they're usually going to a tribal group or somewhere in a village somewhere where they're going to live in 19th century conditions and things like that. When people are going to engage with unreached people groups today, it's more likely that they're going to meet people who live in a city. Because urbanization has changed the face of today's world. The majority of people in the world today live in cities. You know, the majority of Americans live in cities, right? So as cities expand, you have fewer people who live in the rural areas. And I'm not saying they're not important. They're important, and where they're not reached, they should also be reached. It's strategic to recognize that fact, that people live in cities. And it's actually, it's very easy to not realize the scope of this. That cities in the U.S. are actually on the smaller side. What's the biggest city in the U.S.? New York, right? The big cities in Asia, Manila, Tokyo, they're several times bigger than New York. I'm saying people live in cities. Now, what's the implication of that? If I'm considering mission, I want to be missional. I find, in my opinion, that among a certain group of Christians here in the U.S., our idea of Christianity is tied closely to living in the suburbs. You know, the suburban life with the man, his wife, and how many children? 2 children, 1 dog, and half a cat. But the point I'm making is that what prepares you for mission is actually going to the inner city here you're more likely to be equipped to where the people that need to be reached in the world are. Cities are strategic for mission. The next thing is, it's a big word that a lot of people are using now, and I'll explain it. That we now have polycentric Christianity. Polycentric simply means many centers. You no longer have one center. And here's what I mean by center. When Jesus came, when the church started, the center, if you like, geographical center, social center, it was Jerusalem. After a while, it moved to Antioch. When you're reading Acts, you see the center moved to Antioch. It was from Antioch that the first missionaries were sent out. Paul and Barnabas, when they were sent out by the church in Antioch. Now, if you keep tracing, it kept moving westward. At some point, it got to Europe. In fact, the nature of what I mean by these centers is illustrated by the fact that today you see a lot of people who say, oh, Christianity is a Western religion. And I laugh because Christianity started in the Middle East. It did not start in Europe. But the point is, it became so deeply rooted that it became European. And that's not a bad thing because the Europeans needed the gospel. But Christianity also came to Nigeria and became Nigerian. That's why I'm having this conversation with all of us today. But here's the thing. Because the church is now polycentric, unlike before when you had one center, and you'll see the vibrancy in the Christian movement is mostly in that region. You have missionaries who are going out are from that region. It's no longer that way today. Today you have multiple centers. There are many implications of that for mission. I'll give you two. When you go on the mission field now, a lot of times the teams who are serving as missionaries are multi-ethnic teams. Multi-ethnic and multinational. And multi-agency. So it used to be that if you went to, let's say, you went to one tribe in the Philippines, you might see a team of missionaries, maybe 10 of them, who are all from the United States, who are also all from one agency, maybe CMF. 50 years ago, if you went to Nairobi, you'll see a team of CMF missionaries all from the US. What we're finding that's more the norm now is that you'll see a team of missionaries. One might be from Australia, one's from Nigeria, one is from South Korea, another one from England, and one from the US. And they don't all come from the same mission agency. But there is this recognition that we're doing kingdom work and we do it together. That's the implication of this polycentric. So it looks different from what people might recognize from 50 years ago. Well, how do we deal with that? If you're a church pastor, you're leading a church, maybe as you disciple people, help them realize that it's not only within your church building that there are Christians. Maybe help them realize that we're engaged in kingdom work that God has called us together to do. Technology, obviously, is something. It will be, I think it will be wrong not to think about technology when we think about missions, just because of the way technology is permeating and shaping everything. Artificial intelligence is the latest thing. But even technology that gives us access. Now people more than ever, people can communicate with anyone from across the world, and it's not very expensive to do so. And here's the thing. Living in Oregon, I live in Oregon. Oregon is in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. The United States is a Western country in North America, has had this technological advancement, like decades and decades of technological advancement. So when someone has an iPhone, you're like, yeah, this is not an iPhone, but let's pretend that it is an iPhone. This is the pinnacle of the handheld technological device. And it was made here in the good old US of A. Now, here's the thing. You can see people across the world who 10 years ago, or maybe till now, still do not have electricity. But they have smartphones. Do you understand what I'm saying? They do not have the paved roads that we've had for 200 years. But they have smartphones and access to the internet. It's a little mind-boggling, and there are a number of social and ethical issues that come with that. Because, for one, because we've dealt with technology for a long time, we have policies, we have laws. There's some ethics that are kind of catching up. No, not for AI. Nobody has gotten there yet. They're still trying to figure it out. But you have people who have access to the same technology. We can leverage it for the gospel. But it's also governments and authorities across the world are also leveraging it both to monitor and intensify their persecution of Christians. So it's like a double-edged sword. I'd like to hear what you think. What do you think about some of these things? And what else comes to mind as you've interacted with missionaries? There may be missionaries in the room here. What are some things we should be thinking about? Remember the topic, changes on the horizon. Looking at the present so that when the future becomes the present, we're well prepared and we're ready. Danny has the microphone. Or questions, if you have some questions about something I've said.
We'll start here and then come to you.
I just want to say I appreciate what you're saying. I think sometimes people think that me befriending someone from another country is just too hard. It's not that hard. You pray, you maybe prayer walk. Someone from that country may say hi to you before you even say hi to them, and then you're off and running. With just that little bit of simplicity, we've enjoyed a friendship with a Syrian family and Afghanistan family, and we can do it.
Amen. Remember when I was talking about the hypothetical Syrian woman? It wasn't just a hypothetical. There was a Christian lady in Minneapolis who took her toddler to the library for, you know how they have these reading programs in the library. And she happened to see this woman in a hijab that brought her child. After some awkward exchanges, they went out to coffee, and she said, "You just realized that this was another young woman who had the same fears and frustration as a mother, who had the same hopes and dreams for their 2-year-old, who just had an extra layer of difficulty because they were migrant, they were transplanted from their home." And this Christian woman realized what a missional opportunity it was. And it just started with saying hello and smiling across the room. Yes?
Maybe this isn't fair for me to ask you this question, but I'll do it anyway. In light of that, the strategic analysis of missions today in relation to its contrast to how people our age are more comfortable in its historical context, what are the needs and what are we doing in our educational programs, particularly higher education, in order to inspire that calling, direct that calling, and prepare it in a new generation? Because that's when you talk about those staggering numbers that have declined, my challenge is how do we inspire that engagement today?
You all know he's my boss, right? So there's an official answer. At least if I want to keep my job. No. Your question actually is very important. This is a pressing need. We need to engage with it, but engaging with it means providing training that's relevant to the context and the time we're in. So if we're training missionaries for 1980s mission field, that will not do. I think we have to train potential missionaries for today's mission field. We need to prepare them for polycentric Christianity. And one of the things I'll say, and this is something that we're doing at Bushnell, is helping our young adults have a purposeful vocational approach to life in general. And what I mean by that is, maybe one generation ago, if you wanted to be a missionary, you went to Bible college or you went to seminary and they taught you how to be a missionary. But now, anybody, in fact, the more practical training you have, you're getting a degree in business administration, that's a tool that can be employed missionally. And if they have that stance by which they approach life and see everything through the lenses of God's kingdom and God's call on my life, they're more likely to engage missionally wherever they are. Do you see what I'm saying? Unlike before, when you have missionaries, they've gone to the mission field, and then you have the rest of us. But today, it's polycentric everywhere to everywhere. In many cases, the mission field is actually coming to us. We don't need to go to, well, we still need to go. But since not everybody can go, like my brother here was saying, the mission field is coming because of migration. And we can prepare people to be ready to engage missionally, even from right here at home. See a hand here and a hand here. Are we out of time?
Love to continue. And this has been so rich and good, and we just want to thank him for that. Thank you. I would say to the rest